really get into the swing of this. Perfect. So we will be recording today's presentation for upload on the YouTube later on. So welcome everybody to the March meeting of the Austin Women's Investing Group. We are a diverse group of women who gather together for discussions about investing, finance, retirement, and all things related. We really draw strength from the different backgrounds and experience levels of all members. So whether you are a person who lives and breathes finance, maybe you invest in a professional capacity, or if you are a DIY investor, or someone who's just beginning and here to learn, all of your questions, comments, contributions are absolutely welcome and encouraged. And that's really the beauty of getting together and talking about these topics in a fun and safe environment. We have our meetup group. That's probably where you received the meeting details for today. We also have our Facebook group where we connect with each other in between meetings, as well as our YouTube channel where we've kind of built up a really good library of past meetings for replay at any time. So check us out on both sites, the Facebook and the YouTube, to get connected with everybody and have access to that library of really good resources from past speakers. My name is Gwen Leonaris. I'm not usually the person that is emceeing these meetings. The woman that y'all are most familiar with is Sarah Glakis, but Sarah's enjoying a Saturday with her family today. So myself and Lori Watts, we are part of the co-organizer team here. We will be helping to facilitate today's discussion. So as we mentioned before, if y'all could use your chat box, get introduced to each other, and that's also the best place to stick questions, comments, thoughts, and we will collect those and make sure that they are addressed by Manisha and Annabelle, our guest speakers, whenever there's a good stopping point in the presentation. A very important disclaimer that we like to put out at the beginning of every meeting. Nothing said in this meeting is meant to be taken as individualized investing advice. We're all here sharing our experiences, learning from each other. But if you would like to speak with somebody about your specific financial setup, definitely look out for a professional that you hire that can take a look at everything and tailor that conversation to you. And so now turning to our guest speakers, Annabelle, Gall and Manisha Gupta from Austin Wealth Management are here today. They are returning guest speakers, having spoken with us last year about home equity, which was a really informative and fun discussion. And so I'm really hoping that we can have that same level of energy and participation today that we all really enjoyed last year. And I'll leave it to Annabelle and Manisha if y'all could introduce yourselves and then we can get started.
Great. Thanks, Gwen, and thanks, Lori, as well for facilitating. Manisha and I are planners at Austin Wealth Management. We really enjoy working with women who are facing a lot of the same issues we are in their lives. We emphasize financial planning first and foremost. The investment part is really important as well, but we like to start everything with a holistic and comprehensive financial plan approach. So you'll hear us refer to that a lot during this conversation about how decisions around equity compensation shouldn't be made in a vacuum. They should be aligned with your financial plan for yourself and for your family. And as Gwen mentioned, we do have a lot of information to share today. Some of it's pretty detailed, and just bear in mind that it's not meant to be individually directed or individual advice. You should consult an attorney or a financial planner like one of us or a firm like ours to talk more in depth about your personal situation. But equity compensation is a topic we are getting more and more questions about from our clients and from friends and family. Part of that is because there's such an enormous amount of mobility occurring right now and transitions in the workforce as people are moving from previously perhaps public sector jobs or jobs that don't have any type of equity compensation into companies or situations where equity compensation does play a role. And additionally, many companies who have traditionally always granted various types of equity compensation are doing it more aggressively, or perhaps in an attempt to attract talent, they're increasing their variety, diversity and variety of different types of equity compensation. So it's a hot topic right now, and it is a very confusing one. You can spend hours and hours diving into the weeds on this stuff. So our goal today is just to provide you with a really high-level overview, talking about some of the key 3 to 4 types of equity compensation, and spend a little bit of time on each of those. And then there's you can always do some more research on your own, or again consult with a professional to get more information on other types of equity compensation. They're a little bit more narrowly defined and nuanced. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share our presentation. Manisha, did I miss anything that we wanted to add at the beginning?
Hi, everyone. No, thank you, Annabelle. I think you did it all, but just to let you know, again, reiterate the fact that this is not investment advice at all. So please, refer to a financial professional for any advice that you need. One of the things that I would like to say is that it is one of the most evolving fields in finance. There is all these new companies coming up with new kinds of equity compensation. So it can be very confusing at times. And 2021 was one of the year after the dot-com boom that most companies, so many companies, went IPO in 2021. So again, it's a very hot topic. So just our humble attempt to help you understand the compensation.
Great. So can everyone see my screen, the first slide here? Go up here. So first, we're just going to start with basic definition about what is equity compensation. It's simply the practice of granting equity in a company or a profitable organization in exchange for work. And so there's a lot of reasons that companies do that. Some important purposes about that are to attract and retain talent. So we want to keep good, smart people around as long as possible. And by granting equity compensation or a combination of different types of equity compensation, it incentivizes employees to stay and invest and work hard in the company. The other thing that's important to know is that for many of startups, early emerging companies, companies that are sort of getting off the ground, that it can be a strong incentive to align your work and the energy that you're putting in and the hours you're putting in to the company's growth and how well the company does. So if everyone pulls together in the same boat with the same amount of effort, it helps the company to grow and to expand and to make more money. And then a third really important purpose that's just a little bit more self-interested on behalf of the company is that it does reduce the need for companies who are tight on cash or are hoarding capital to pay cash in salaries or in income or other types of compensation. Instead, they use equity compensation to financially compensate their employees, and instead of bonuses in cash or signing bonuses or performance bonuses, compensation is often used for that, or to offset parts of your salary, at least in the early years. So we're going to talk today about the kind of, it's 3 here, but it's really 4 of the most common types of equity compensation. The first is restricted stock units, and you'll often hear this also referred to as restricted stock awards. And these are, I think personally, a little bit of, not being a novice myself when it comes to equity compensation, I think this is the easiest one to understand. And that's that you get shares in the company after a period of time, sort of like a bonus. They provide you with a set amount of shares, usually called grants. and they are designated and tied to a certain schedule where you get to essentially cash those stock units in and trade them in, sell them for money, liquidate them. You can also, when they are able to vest at the scheduling point, you can also keep them and hold on to them. So in our line of work, we see people doing a number of different things if they're depending on kind of what their situation is and how comfortable they are with the company and their work. Some people prefer to hold on to the restricted stock units and not sell them, and others prefer to liquidate them right away. And we'll talk a little bit more about the ramifications of that. So then secondly, you have incentive stock options called ISOs and non-qualified stock options. So these are two types of stock options. These aren't given to you or awarded to you. They are, instead it gives you the options. You have options to buy shares of the company at a determined price that's set by the company. So as opposed to the RSUs, where they're usually, they're waiting for you. It's just a question of staying at the company for the period of years through which the RSUs vest. The incentive stock options and non-qualified stock options are a little bit less tangible. They're, you have a specified amount of time and price which you can buy the shares with your own money at a determined price. And then the third type of, the fourth type we're going to talk about today is the employee stock purchase plan. This tends to be slightly less common. Sometimes it's only available to certain levels of executives, but with the employee stock purchase plan, somewhat similar to stock options, you also get to buy the shares at a discounted price. So usually that's 10 or 15% off of a specified price, and employees have a window of time in which you're able to do that over a period of months. It's usually deducted from your paycheck, put into a holding fund, and then you're able to buy those shares at a specified price. Manisha, is there anything you want to add to those?
No, I think that's great. We'll go over a lot of details as we move forward along the presentation.
Yeah. So again, each of these types of equity compensation are intended to contribute to the creation of value within the company for its users, for its customers, and for the employees. But the way that they are utilized and leveraged can be very different depending on the employee and depending on what, even your level of understanding about it. And it can be very complicated. And as to Manisha's point, that there's a lot of liability tied up with the company to advise you, personally about what you should do. So it's important as you are, if you're in a position where you are have the opportunity to participate in any of these types of equity compensation programs, that you kind of get familiar with the acronyms and the different types, because the terminology can be confusing, and then the tax implications can also be confusing. So I'm going to the next one. So we have a little chart here that helps you to understand just, very basic principles. We have the type of here, RSUs over here, restricted and non-qualified options over here, and the ESPPs over here. And this just has an illustration of what happens in different situations when the stock price goes down, when the stock price stays the same, and when the stock price goes up. So when we use the word bonus, it's kind of just an easier way to think about these coming to you in the form of a financial bonus. So, depending on what happens with the price of the stock at the company, and what happens in the markets too, the potential upside and potential gain, as well as potential loss, is a little bit different for each of these categories. So we're going to dive a little bit more into restricted stock units here.
Annabelle, let's
So,
pause
yeah.
for questions just for a minute, just to see if anybody has any
Yeah.
questions on the general overview.
Yeah, we did have a question from Melissa come in about the difference between incentive stock options and non-qualified stock options.
So they're both stock options. The difference is how they're taxed and in the taxation. So we'll cover a lot of that in detail in the later part of the slide. So why don't we save that question for that time?
Great. Any others?
Okay, from Emily, so this assumes that employees don't pay for their options. Is that correct?
No, that is not correct. Employees, for options, employees will always pay something for their option. And that's where the confusion comes about, is like most people think that options are free, but they're not. RSU is the only thing that employees don't pay for, at least among these categories that we're discussing today. There's a lot of other categories that are just beyond the scope of this presentation that might be different, but options you pay. Remember, option is an option of buying the company stock. So whenever you're buying something, you have to pay something for it.
Okay. Move on to this next one here. So for RSUs, one of the most important considerations for RSU is the vesting schedule. The vesting schedule simply means how much of the RSUs you can sell or liquidate once they become accessible to you at which point in time. And there are two most common type of vesting schedules. The first one is called a graded vesting schedule, and you often see these spread out over 3, 5, 7 years, depending on the company. But essentially what that means is that you gain access to 20% of the total amount of RSUs you've been granted at each of these different points year over year. They become available to you. Many companies use a brokerage account like Charles Schwab or E-Trade, and you'll see the value of the RSUs this entire time, but when they become available to sell according to the vesting schedule or available for you to simply take ownership of them, they change, their characteristic changes in that account. And you'll often see sometimes there's 2 vesting periods, sometimes 4 each quarter throughout the year, but they usually tend to follow this very consistent pattern of a graded schedule. And the idea is that essentially the company wants to keep you around, and they make those RSUs available to you to either liquidate or to keep and take possession of year over year over a set number of years. The cliff is a little bit different. The cliff schedule tends to place more emphasis. It's a little bit more of an extreme emphasis on retention because what it says is that you can't access any of the RSUs until year 3. Sometimes we see as long as year 5. And when that year does happen, when you finally reach that year, then you have access to either 50% or 100% of all those RSUs. So that's definitely the golden handcuffs example, because it does people can't really get to them or touch them until a specified further year out. So one of the things that's important to know about RSUs, because it essentially is a financial bonus coming to you, most companies and organizations withhold 22% of the value of the RSUs if you choose to sell them. So if you sell them in the market, liquidate them, the company usually withholds 22% for taxes. So that essentially, helps a little bit with knowing that you'll have enough on hand to pay for the taxes on the shares when income tax time comes around. But 22%, as we know, is a little bit lower on the tax bracket end for people who are higher income earners. So if you're in the 30%, 35% tax bracket, a higher tax bracket, one of the things to keep in mind is setting aside enough or additional money to pay those taxes are in the future. And some employers give you the option to increase your tax withholding at a higher percentage. So if you are in that higher tax bracket, it's important to plan for additional tax withholding and not just assume that only the default 22% is what you're going to need to pay on the taxes. And the other thing that's important to know is that when the shares become available to you in your vesting period, you can sell them for whatever the share price is worth that day of vesting. So whatever it's trading at that particular day. So some people like to sell immediately. Others, depending on if the company's had a bad month or a bad quarter, they may hold on to those RSUs once they've fully vested and liquidate them. Wait for the stock price to go a little bit higher and then liquidate them. So one of the examples we have here is $100,000 in RSU value, and you get to a point where, say it's April of the year, which you can fully vest it. You want to sell all the shares to equal that value. You'll wind up with 78,000 cash essentially, and 22,000 of that stays to go to pay the IRS later. Manisha, anything to add to that? Okay. One of the other considerations that's important for RSUs is to think about what will happen to your shares if circumstances change, life events happen. It's important to understand the company plan and what happens to those shares if something happens to you. So, for example, you leave the company, move, take a different job, you retire. Never want to think about this, but it does happen. Something happens to you in terms of a death event or disability event. And then in some cases, one thing that can be real, detrimental from a financial impact is that if a company is bought or merges with another company, sometimes those RSUs are simply made worthless. They're either absorbed into the new company or they're essentially invalidated by the partnership agreement between the companies once the merger happens. So it's just important to be aware of what happens to the shares under a variety of circumstances. And if you're planning on changing jobs or retiring, just be aware of your vesting schedule and plan those changes accordingly. So if you know that you want to leave perhaps next year or in 2 years, but you're watching a pretty good chunk of RSUs that are going to vest, it's important to think about maybe not making that departure until after you can get those fully vested shares and take them with you, not leaving to the month before or 6 months before that your shares are going to vest. You can't take shares with you. That's another question we get frequently. So RSUs are not portable. Once you leave the company, they're gone. So that's
Annabelle,
just another thing to keep in mind.
No, I'm just going to correct that a little bit. Is that the unvested are not portable. The vested are portable.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, the ones that if they haven't reached vesting yet and they're sort of intangible, you aren't able to move them. But yes, once you take possession of the shares and then you own them, they're your shares, and you can take them with you if you change jobs. So. So where to find this information is important. All the different rules around what might happen to your RSUs, and those are usually in documents called the grant documents, which can be pretty dense. So if it's confusing, if it's unclear or not spelled out in a way that makes sense to you, feel free to contact your HR department. Sometimes they even have an investor relations or a legal department that handles specific employee questions around the compensation programs and how the RSUs are set up. So just again, very important to educate yourself and to be aware of the impact of your decisions around the vesting schedule and around whether to sell or to hold on to them, and other plans for that. So we wanted to give you a sense of just a hypothetical amount of shares granted, RSUs granted to you, and what that happens, how that looks like over time. So I'm just going to, I'll talk through this a little bit and then take some time for everyone to just take a look at it. But it's essentially an illustration of a sample vesting schedule with grant lots. So the blue down here are the vested shares. So you're seeing it increase over time. And you'll see that the unvested shares decrease over time as those are being cashed out. The share price, assuming this company is doing well, we have it increasing from the start date through year 5 from $50 to $75. So as the share price for the company increases, the value of those RSUs increase. But it also means that your exposure, as the stock continues to increase in value, your concentration and exposure in the company's stock also increases. So one of the ways to reduce your concentration as those shares gain in value and you get access to more and more of them year over year is liquidation. So selling those and taking that money and investing it in other places, such as globally diversified mutual funds, other company stock. There's a variety of ways to do that. So just something that we are always mindful of. It's great when the stock price goes up, and it's great as you get access to more and more of those RSUs as the years go by. But we want to make sure that it's not overly concentrated or putting you in a position where your portfolio is is weighed down, very, very concentrated in the exposure to the company. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide here. So this is talking a little bit more about that. If you're thinking about these RSUs and your other investments that you might hold, this is just a visual depiction of understanding how that impacts your portfolio over time. Again, as you as the value of the shares increase, your exposure, which also means your risk, increases. It becomes more and more concentrated in this one particular stock, your company stock that you're holding. So again, most of the time for most clients and families we're working with, we recommend liquidating these shares and putting the proceeds into diversified holdings where you're holding, thousands of shares of companies instead of just one. Because if you're busy and you're, enjoying your job, enjoying your family, and these RSUs are building up in that account, it can sneak up on you in terms of the concentration and the risk. So lots of questions about what to do when your vesting time arrives. And it's exciting to be able to get access to those RSUs, but what to do with them is also an important question. So we always start with, we call it the decision framework, a way to think about how to make that decision and what's important to you. And that begins with your overall financial plan. So most importantly, we start with, do you need cash? Would it benefit you to have more cash on hand? Should you pay down debt, such as higher interest debt? Maybe it's credit card or student loans that are of a higher level interest, a car. And then thirdly, if you had this amount in cash and you didn't need to clear out debt or contribute to other purposes, how would you invest it? So another way that we like to think about this is if somebody was to come around and say, I'm going to give you $100,000 in Microsoft stock, or I'm going to give you $100,000 in a Vanguard S&P index fund. Most people would think about that, think about the, it's exciting to get, to be invested and involved in one particular company, but there's also a lot of risk around that. So given the choice, thinking about how you would invest that money if it wasn't tied up in the stock, if it wasn't aligned with this one particular company, if it was just cash at your fingertips, how you would invest it makes a lot of sense when it comes time to sell it and put that money to work elsewhere. We also have people who are personally, very invested, not from the financial sense, but from the emotional sense, in their company. They believe in it. They're working hard. They love their colleagues. They believe in the company's mission, and that's okay too. If you have a real attachment to the stock, there's ways to mitigate that risk and to manage that. One of the things we like to have people think through is how much company stock you already own. So in many cases, you may have company stock in your 401k because your company, that's one of the options that you can invest in through your 401k, or your company provides it that way. And then also thinking about as a percentage level in your portfolio, how much of the company stock to hold on to. We use sort of a baseline rule of usually no more than 7 to 10% of any particular company stock, just because it does open you up to some risk. And another kind of final consideration is if you do, really like the company and you want to hold onto the stock, when and why would you sell? Like, what event or change would prompt you to sell it, and when would that happen? Then another important thing is the tax implications, which is a really big one. You'll hear us emphasizing that a lot. And that's upon vesting, you may owe more taxes than the company withholds at a default, and capital gains taxes apply after that stock is vesting on future realized gains and losses. So if you hold on to that stock, you're subject to the associated capital gains and losses. Whatever happens to that stock, the price goes up, the price goes down, dramatically increases one way or the other. You're responsible for those tax implications. So just some other important points to consider. So we put this together just as a way to visualize one of the things we get a lot of questions about, particular companies and certain stock in particular companies. We have people who, especially in Austin, may have worked for some of these larger companies and do hold a lot of stock in them. But if you look at the past 10 years, there's quite a variety of performance and how companies have done. So for even some of the largest tech companies in the past 10 years, some of them have not done that well. If you look at IBM, for example, if you're holding on to those shares, you're actually losing out against the market. You can see it's over 10 years. There's it's that little pink line down there, the negative 8.97%. Others have done, obviously, very well. You've got Microsoft and Amazon. But one caveat about that is that we don't know how long that rapid and aggressive growth is going to continue. So just something to keep in mind as you think about how long to hold on to the stock if you're overly concentrated in a company's stock. Just make sure to pay attention to the pattern of the stock price and the value and how it's doing over an extended period of time. For even these high performers, the explosive growth isn't going to be able to continue forever. And even for some of the seemingly successful and well-performing or at least stable companies, for example, like IBM or like Oracle, they're not always doing as well as the overall market is doing. So this is just another snapshot. This is the past year, though, since a little bit before January of 2021, looking forward into the beginning of this year. Again, you can see that Amazon actually here is one of the worst performers. So again, there's a lot of unpredictability, a lot of unknowns about what will happen to the company, what will happen to the share price. So just something to bear in mind that if you want to hold on to those shares and not liquidate them, it's important to be comfortable with unpredictability and be comfortable with volatility, because we've certainly seen a lot of that, even again for companies that are considered to be popular and doing well. This is another example of two companies that are in the same space, the same type of industry, and just depending on a whole variety of factors. One of them, Microsoft, the price has done very, very well. So if you were an employee, the past 3 to 5 years, you've seen astronomical growth. But the interesting thing that we also like to point out here is that between between 2002 to 2012, if you were an employee at Microsoft and you were getting RSUs, you technically had really sort of what they call like a lost decade. That's another reason that we want to show that diversification is really important, because there are going to be a lot of other companies during this time that were doing well, and if you're diversified in other sectors and other industries, it will help offset this really poor performance for about 10 years. So just looking back into the 2000s, there's another kind of snapshot of what we call the lost decade. The S&P did pretty poorly for the 2000 to 2009 period overall. You can see this little under the line here, the negative growth. Whereas if you're invested in this, we have about 5 different mutual funds here, all representing different sectors and classes in the market. This actually did better than the S&P because, again, there's a lot of diversification. You're in large caps, small caps, emerging markets over here. So spreading your money out and your investments out, again, over a diversified portfolio with 4 to 5 different funds representing all sectors of the market, you would have done just fine during this time period. If you're only in one or two heavily concentrated in stocks that are big players in the S&P 500, that would not have been the case. So again, just to summarize again for our kind of points of emphasis here, with RSUs, we like to, in most cases, recommend that you liquidate those holdings when they vest and that you diversify them. Again, in some cases, you might have a particular attachment to the stock, and if that's if you really believe in it, it's something that's important to you, it's okay to carve out a little portion of your portfolio where you're holding on to that particular stock. We emphasize again, no more than 7 to 10% of your total holdings. Also to think about the total percentage of how much of your assets do you want that one stock, that one company to represent out of all your assets. And then thinking about sort of capturing the profits, thinking about how, when the stock is profitable, how much you want to see it increase, and making a plan, to sell for that level is important as well, so that you aren't always tied into an unlimited or undefined timeline for selling. And finally, again, just sticking with your overall financial plan as it looks at everything that you own and are invested in. The RSUs need to play a role in that, but also need to have an impact in that overall, as in paying off debt, using it to back up your cash reserves, your emergency fund, and funding other priorities in your plan. Just make sure that what you do with those RSUs fits within your goals for your financial plan. I'm gonna pause for questions there because I know that was a lot. And I know we also had a lot of detailed charts and graphs too.
One question that someone had, I think it was Dawn, was about short and long-term gains. Can you go through the whole process of, like, when you vest, what date is the date that you look at as, and what amount for your, when you figure out how much you've gained or lost?
Yeah, sure. Manisha, do you want to take that
sure.
one?
Yes. So what happens is on the day of vesting, anything that you get is ordinary income tax. So that's just like if you were to get a bonus, a cash bonus from your company, how it is ordinary income to you. So on the day of vesting, that is what it is. If you decide to hold your company's stock or your RSUs from the day of vesting, then that's your cost basis. The day of vesting becomes your cost basis, the price of the share on the day of vesting. If you hold your share for less than a year after the day of vesting and sell it before the end of 1 year, it is always going to be short-term capital gains on the difference between the stock price on the day of vesting and the price on the day you sell it. If you hold your share for longer than a year, for 365 days plus 1 day, so 366 days, anytime you hold a share for longer than 1 year, that is going to be long-term capital gain. So to give you an example, and this is again a hypothetical example, if today is March 26th, I had $100 vested today in Amazon stock. $100 is my cost basis. I decide that I want to sell my $100 on April 26th of this year, and the price of Amazon stock is $150 on that day. The difference between the $150 and $100 is going to be short-term capital gain because 1 year is not up yet. However, if I decide I want to hold that one stock that I have for $100 until next year, and I sell it in April of next year, April of 2023, I've already satisfied the long-term capital gain period. And if the stock price on that day in next year in April is $200, that total $100, the 200 minus the $100 today, is going to be my long-term capital gain. In that case, there is no short-term capital gain. So it's going to be ordinary income on the day of vesting. And depending on your holding period, it's either going to be short-term capital gain or long-term capital gain. Okay.
Just a minute. So Melissa was asking, who do you sell the RSU stocks to? And I can talk about that a little bit because I've gone through this. I was with Siemens, a German company. And when I vested, they gave me the option of selling some of my restricted stock to pay for the taxes, or I could give them the money for the taxes. So when I sold the stock, they had basically there was a program that I used that they gave me access to that managed this all for me. And when I sold it, at the time it was on the New York Stock Exchange. So the New York Stock Exchange is where I sold it to. Later, since it was a German company, they actually moved to Germany. And when I sold it through the German stock exchange. But they become regular stocks once they're vested. You just have the difference of having to pay. It's sort of like you're paying for the vesting. That's when you're paying your taxes because it's like a bonus. So I hope that answers your question. If you guys do have some other questions, you can, let's see, Gwen wants to keep, at the end, we'll do the general Q&A. But I think those were most of the questions in general that people had about the RSUs. I think they're also called restricted stock awards. Is that correct? Oh wait, you're
muted.
Thanks.
There are some differences in how the restricted stock awards and stock units are treated by different companies. So some companies say the same, but some it's different. So again, that's where educating yourself on your grant documents comes in place. Restricted stock awards are a little different, like they're awarded. Their award thing is a little different. I don't want to go into that conversation, but we can, if in the future, if there's a lot of interest, we can have a separate presentation for that. Also, the only one thing that I would like to add to what Lori said is that you actually, if you're working for a tech company that is planning on giving you equity compensation, they will automatically have you open a brokerage account with whoever their custodian is. So if companies like, I know like Microsoft works with, I think, Fidelity for their custodian. So if you're joining Microsoft will have you fill the paperwork to open an account at Fidelity. When your stocks vest, they'll be deposited into that account. And it's just like any regular brokerage account. And they're sitting in there. You can go and sell it anytime, just like a regular transaction that you would do on any other brokerage site.
Yeah, and that's also why they go with you when you leave, because once they're vested, they become regular stocks that you own. But until they're vested, they're just the promise of that stock. So somebody was asking if you get a dollar amount or the number of shares calculated on a grant date rather than on a rolling basis during vesting periods. I think it kind of depends on what you want to use that for, because you have the promise of a certain number of shares. You don't really know what the dollar amount would be, but the stocks that you've already vested in that belong to you, those are the shares you actually own. Otherwise, it's sort of the promise of receiving that many shares. So it sounds like Sand Foam 13, maybe we can address that at the end because it sounds a little specific to what you're talking about. Oh, some companies list the offer as the number of dollars of RSUs.
Just to add to that, when you join the company, your grant will always be in dollars. Then, the day of joining or the day of the grant, those dollars are converted into shares at that day's market price. So if I'm given the grant today for 100,000 shares and the Amazon stock is at $100 today, 100,000 divided by 100, I'm given 1,000 shares to vest over the next 4 years or whatever that time period is. And because that's when the dollars get converted into the number of shares, and that's logged in. And then you'll see in your brokerage account that how many shares you will get on what date. Whenever you get a new grant again, the company will give the grant in dollars, but then converts it into number of shares on the day of the grant, if that makes sense. Just like the company is going to tell you, I'm going to give you 100,000 in bonus. They're going to tell you 100,000 in share on the, depending on the price of the stock on that day.
Okay. And if the company is not traded, it's an option. And we'll talk about options in a little bit.
All right. Let's move on to employee stock purchase plan. So again, as Annabelle mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, it's another form of equity compensation. The employee stock purchase plan is permitting the employees to buy the shares at a discounted price. So one of the key distinctions that I do want to explain here is that sometimes it's very confusing if you're new to the tech sector and you haven't worked for a technology company or any company that grants these ESPPs. You would think that, the money is getting deducted from my paycheck, and you're already buying the employee stock purchase. So there is a lot of things the money get deducted from your paycheck. It will be for benefits. It will be for your 401k if you enroll in a 401k. And this is another thing where you will use your after-tax payroll deductions. So again, this is not pre-tax. You are not putting in money pre-tax into this account. It is not a retirement plan. So it's very different from a 401k. You decide how much money money every paycheck you want to get have deducted from your paycheck to acquire the company stocks. Usually what happens is that some of the key things to know about is, again, know the rules of your company's ESPP. Every company, all these equity compensation documents are drafted by lawyers. And if no offense, but they are they try to make it as confusing as possible. So make sure you know the rules. Then the key dates is that you need to know what is the offering period, what is your grant date, purchase date, and look back period. So offering period is company decides that they are going to offer the ESPPs to the employees for the next 2 years today. That's your offering period. Now, within the offering period, then there'll be various grant dates. Like the grant day is today, March 26th, and today is the grant date. The company decides that you have the option of buying your employee stock purchase plan or some shares from your paycheck, and that is the grant date. Then the purchase date is usually 6 months after the grant date. What happens during the 6 months is that every paycheck, you will have money deducted from your paycheck, and it will be deposited into your brokerage account that the company will have you open. And on the purchase date, the company is going to purchase. You don't have to do anything. The company will purchase the shares for you on the purchase date for however much money you have in that account. And the look back period is, so this is where it gets very confusing. And so usually for ESPPs, the company promises you that you'll get a discount on the purchase price. So you can either get you get a 10 to 15% discount, again, depending on the grant documents. And they will say 2 dates to you. They will tell you 2 dates that it's either the share price on the purchase date or either the share price on the grant date. And that's usually what they decide, that whatever is the lower price on either the grant date or the purchase date, they'll give you 10 to 15% discount off that date. And that's usually the look back period. So that's why all these, knowing these different terms is very important. And then for ESPPs, sometimes there are blackout trading periods that you cannot trade stock during certain times. Again, this is going to be different for each company. So know when is your blackout trading period. Then I think purchase discounts are often 10 to 15%. That is, again, depending on what the company decides. Some companies do decide 15%, some will do 10%. Usually the maximum allowable purchase amount that you're allowed to buy ESPPs for is $25,000 per year. So even if you want to buy more shares, you can buy it through the open marketplace, but the company is saying that no, you can't have more than $25,000 deducted from your paycheck to buy shares of your shares at discount. So that they're kind of limiting the discount for you. Then for ESPPs, there is a lot of tax complications. So to get the full tax benefit, you have to hold the stock for 2 years. After 2 years from grant or 1 year from purchase date to receive the full discount. That's how long you have to hold the stock for. You can sell the stock, but you'll just not get the full tax benefit. So don't get me wrong by assuming that you cannot. You can sell the stock. So once you have bought the stock, it's yours. If there is a blackout period, it's usually around when the company announces financial results and everything. That's usually when the blackout period is for the employees to sell the stock. but you can sell the stock, but you'll not receive the full tax benefits and discount in that case if you decide to sell it before 2 years of grant and 1 year of purchase date. If we move on to the next slide, then we can, so this is just like a chart to show how it looks like. So this first red dot is your offering period begins, when your offering period begins. This is decided by the board of directors in the company's board of directors meeting when the offering period is going to be. It is pretty much same for all employees. There is it's standard all across the company. Then the second dot represents your offering date or the grant date, when you were granted and when the grant was made to you. Then for the 6-month period, you will keep on withholding money from your paycheck, deposit into your account, and this is where the purchase date happens. So the 6 month you'll keep on depositing like a savings account, and then the company purchases the share on this date at a discount. Then one offering period can have multiple purchase periods. So then after this purchase period, then your second 6-month purchase period can end, starts, and then it ends. And typically that's when the offering period ends in 12 months. Some companies just do the offering period for 1 year. Some companies do it for 24 months, but they keep it doing on a recurring basis. So that's how it usually works, the timeline for ESPPs. All right. Now, ESPPs, as I was just mentioning, is that you have to get the full tax benefit, you have to hold it for 2 years from the grant date and 1 year from the purchase date. But there's a lot that can happen in 1 year in the stock market, and especially for one company stock, there's a lot that can happen. So if the market is going up, your actual discount that you're buying the share for is much higher, because as I mentioned that it is the purchase price is the lower price of either the grant date or the purchase date. So again, giving you an example, if and again, I'm just picking up Amazon and $100 very hypothetically. And so if today is the grant date for Amazon stock, it's trading at $100, and my grant date is today, but my purchase period is 6 months from today, then I will get the lower of either today's price or the Amazon's price after 6 months. So after 6 months, if the price is $150, what happens is the lower price is the $100. So I'll actually get a discount, the 10 and 15% discount on the $100. So that's how that's why if the market is going up, your actual discounts are way higher than 10 to 15%. But if the market is going down, your actual discount will be 15%, because then the lower price is going to be on the day of the purchase, and that's what you get the discount for. Then another thing to remember for ESPPs is that if you plan to hold the ESPPs for the whole 2 year from grant date or 1 year from purchase date window, you are exposing yourself to risk, because you don't know. You have paid X price for that share, but if there is a recession, if something goes wrong with the company, then that stock price is going down. So something that you purchased for $100, its value has gone down. Its value may go down to $50 in the next year. So again, we always say, and I'm sure all of you have heard the saying that don't let the tax tail wag the dog. So again, make your decision based on your financial situation, how strongly you feel for the company. The tax part is going to come later. So, but it's important for you to understand that. And if you are ready to take that risk of okay, I want to hold the company stock for 2 years, or I want to take, because of the tax reasons, I really want to hold it for 2 years or 1 year, then that's fine. Just understand what risk you are taking. And that's the most important part, is understanding what risk you are taking. And incorporating it into your overall financial plan is what's most important. There is no right or wrong decision. You will have, usually that's the biggest thing that, biggest mistake that a lot of people make is that they'll talk to the person who sits next to them, or they will talk to somebody in the cafeteria in their company. And most of the time, that is not a financial advice, because the person who's sitting next to you does not explain to you their whole financial picture. Their financial picture might allow them to take that level of risk. Yours might not. So you have to just decide based on your financial picture. Then, should you participate? That's one thing that I'd want to reiterate, that when a company offers ESPP, sometimes we feel obligated to participate in it. So remember, there is no obligation for you to participate in an ESPP plan. If your cash flow determines that you want to participate, you can participate in ESPP, you will do that. But remember, ESPP should not be your first investment option. Your priorities should be always your cash flow. You should be maximizing your 401ks before you participate in ESPP. If you're saving for your kids' education and whatever plan you have for saving into the 529 plan or any other investment vehicles that you're saving for education, you should be fulfilling that before you're participating in ESPP. So those are some of the decision points to think why should you participate in ESPP or should you not? Then again, is this a compelling investment? If like Annabelle mentioned, that the last decade for Cisco and Microsoft, even if you are getting, the discount at whatever percent, then you still don't want to hold the company stock for 2 years, because at that point, it doesn't make sense for you to, just take the discount and maybe sell it right away and invest somewhere else. So think of it, is it a compelling investment for you? Or how long do you plan to stay with the company? That's also another, so that's another point you should consider if you're participating in an ESPP, again, because of those 1 year from grant and 2 year from 2 years from grant and 1 year from purchase period, if you want to hold on to those stocks. Then if we move on to the next slide, I think that's where it just says that the decision framework, max out your cash targets, max out your retirement accounts, max fund your college accounts, whatever your targets are, then contribute monthly to a non-retirement brokerage account. And this is one thing that we talk to a lot of our clients about, is that it's important to have money saved outside of your 401k or 529 plans. Because remember, in your 401k or retirement accounts, you don't have access to that money until 59 and a half. So you should always have a plan to set aside some cash outside of non-retirement accounts. Now, depending on how much risk you can take and how much risk you want to take and what your risk tolerance level is, you can decide to invest that money in different type, in a brokerage account, in different kind of instruments, whether it's bonds or stocks or ETFs or mutual funds. But it's very important to have some money outside of your 401ks and retirement accounts into these brokerage accounts. Then after you have done all of this, after you have satisfied all of these savings targets, if you still have positive cash flow left, then consider your ESPP option. Then you should think about, okay, I'm getting a discount of 15%. Maybe I should put some money into my company's ESPP plan. Then again, it's the same framework. If you love your company stock, make your decision. How much to invest in the ESPP depends on how much company stock you already own. This is a very important point. I do want to reiterate that depending on your financial situation, some people might be comfortable having 20% of their net worth in their company stock. For somebody else, it might not be worth it to have 20%. That's too much risk for them. So depending on your financial goals, your net worth, what percentage of your net worth do you want in your company stock is really important for you to decide. And then what is the maximum you should own, and why and when would you sell? So coming up with decision points like that, okay, this is the maximum amount of company stock I'm going to own. I'm not going to own more than 10% of my company stock in my portfolio. Then that's it. Anytime you hit more than 10%, sell it. Don't wait for the company stock to hit a certain number. But if you want to wait for the company stock to hit a certain number and it hits a certain number, then sell it. So you decide and stick to that plan. Don't, just make a plan and stick to the plan. Right? I think that, yep. So what should we do with the cash proceeds from ESPP? So again, set aside cash for estimated taxes. All of these employee stock purchase plan or RSUs, remember, there's no free lunch. IRS will always ask you to pay your taxes. If you have received a discount of any sort, anywhere, you will have to pay taxes on it somewhere. So you always want to work with your CPA or works, if you understand the tax, you do your own taxes, work with your CPA to come up with a number for taxes. Then once you sell your ESPPs, you can use that to fund a big time purchase like down payment of the house or max fund your 529Ks or anything else. Then top off your emergency fund. If, this is one thing that we as financial planners always want to make sure our clients have a good amount of emergency fund depending on their situation. So if your emergency fund was lower because of something that happened in the past 6 months or something, you want to make sure that you always have enough emergency fund. Then top off your short-term savings. So if you plan to take a vacation in the next 6 months, if you plan to take a sabbatical, then you want to make sure that you have enough savings to do that. Then fund other tax advantage accounts like 529. And if you have money left after all of these, then you'll reinvest the proceeds in a diversified brokerage account. Again, we cannot just reiterate the importance of diversified brokerage accounts. Annabelle went in detail, showed you some charts of how the companies can vary in their performance level. So investing in a diversified brokerage account is what we would always recommend instead of one company stock. Right? Moving on to the next slide. I think, yes.
Yeah, Manisha, I just wanted to add one thing too, that I think that this is just this guide about, how to allocate the cash is also mostly applicable to the proceeds from RSUs too. I think if you do decide to liquidate, this is probably will probably be our general recommendations as well, just to think through what to do with that cash and where to put it. Just want to add that.
Yeah. I think we're going to do is pause for questions before we move into the incentive stock options. If, Gwen and Lori, if you have any questions that came in, we can take those.
I think Sandy had a question that I missed. Manisha, you mentioned a percentage on this last slide. Is that percentage based on dollar amount or share amount? And Sandy, feel free to unmute and
you guys
give some
mentioned the allocation.
more context
I think
on that.
you said don't be more than, I don't remember, 10% in your company stock, and I totally agree with that. But I was just wondering if you calculate that on the number of shares, or do you just do a point in time calculation of what the stock is worth?
Yeah, we just do a point in time calculation, and that 10% is not set in stone. Again, for some clients, we bring it down to 5%, 5% to 10%. 10% is usually the maximum, unless you are a very high net worth individual and you are comfortable taking that amount of risk. So that is just a point in time calculation. Again, some stocks are so volatile that number keeps on changing, but if you're working with a financial planner, you're reviewing your plan every quarter or every 6 months, and you should be reviewing that number, depending on your situation. right?
Yeah, we didn't have a whole lot of questions actually about the ESPPs. It looks like
All right, perfect.
the next part about
Moving
options
on
is going
to
to be
incentive stock options.
a good discussion, though.
So again, this is the most confusing type of equity award or equity compensation that we get. So again, as Annabelle mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this is the option or the right to buy your company stock at a pretty predetermined price, which is usually called the strike price or the exercise price. And the company decides that strike price or exercise price. You don't have control over it. You can't negotiate on that or anything. It is again divided in the board meeting for the company, depending on the company situation. So what happens usually, stock options are offered by companies who are early stage startups that are not public yet. So that's when the company will offer you the stock options. And the way they do it is that they've gotten some funding, there is some value of their product in the market, but they're not public yet. So what they will incentivize you to buy the share of the company at a very low price. Sometimes we have seen even some cents or maybe a couple of dollars. And they're saying that you will have the option of buying the company's stock at so-and-so price, but we are anticipating that in 5 years, we will go public. The price of our share is going to be a couple of $100. So even though you bought the share for $2, when the company goes public, you'll make millions of dollars because your price was so low that you own the shares at such a low price. So that's usually how they lure the employees into, most of the startups would offer these ISOs or non-qualified stock options and attract the employees if they have. And just to give you an example, Tesla is a really good really good example of this, because Tesla 10 years ago was not even public. And at that time, whoever joined Tesla probably had the option of buying these stocks at a very low price, just a couple of dollars. And now, I don't even know what the current Tesla price is because it's so volatile every day. But if the Tesla price is $1,000 and you bought something for $1, you've already made so much money on that. So that's a story. But there's also the other side of it that we don't hear in the media. There's also companies that don't make it to going public or that are not able to exit and fail. So again, and the third point is that it is not an obligation. It is, so you're not obligated. You're given the option to buy the company's stock, but don't feel pressurized to exercise it or buy it just because your colleague is doing it. So again, usually the option, once your option starts vesting, you have 10 years to buy the company's stock or exercise it. So you have that 10-year decision time when you want to buy the stock, depending on how the company is doing. So you have plenty of time to make that decision. All right. So things to know. Again, very important to read your grant documents. When are you allowed to exercise your options? That's when you want to know, is that usually companies would allow you to exercise the option after 1 year. Before that, they wouldn't. Again, golden handcuffs. They don't want you exercising the option right away and leaving the company. So usually they will have that some amount, like 1 year vesting period or 2 year vesting period, or just like RSU's graded vesting period, like per certain percentage of your stocks will vest. And in options case, what stock vesting means is that on the day of vesting, you're allowed to buy the option. There's nothing that you get on the day of vest in case of a stock option, ISO or a non-qualified stock option. On the day of vesting, you're allowed to purchase the share at a predetermined price. That's what vesting means in case of an option. Then what kind of an option were you granted? And we're going to go into this details of the difference between incentive stock options and non-qualified stock options on the next slide. So I'm going to just leave it at this right now, that know if you have incentive stock options or non-qualified stock options. Then what percentage of the company ownership does your stock represent? If you are a very C-suite executive, this percentage will be very high. If you are, one of the very early stage employee, this percentage will be very high. If you are not a very early stage employee or not a C-suite person, then this percentage might be very small as compared to your total the company's value. Then one of the caveats with stock options, which I think has happened, there was a very recent article in the news that some of the companies don't allow you to own the vested options right away. They have a clause which is called the Repurchase Agreement. And what that means is that if the company gets bought up by another company, then the company can buy back that vested option from you. So you lose that right to buy that option at all. And in that case, if you joined the company because you wanted to make money and make it big, but then if the company gets sold and you're not allowed to make profit of that share or anything, that's, I would say that sucks. So again, this would be in the grant documents, that if the company has a repurchase agreement, then I would say don't even invest in the options. All right. Again, before investing in the options, remember, there's no guarantees. The company, for options, you always have to shell out money out of your pocket unless the company is public. Then if the company is public, you'll have the option of selling away some of the shares right away to buy shares. So if the company is not public, there is no guarantee. The company may survive, may not survive, may not go public. So always understand the risks for that. All right, stock options. Should you exercise? Remember, again, evaluate your financial situation. How much money are you willing to lose? Now think of it, if it's a startup and you have the option of buying 10,000 shares at $1 each, and you want to exercise all of those, that's fine. Just remember, are you willing to lose that $10,000 if the company doesn't make it big? Can you afford to lose that $10,000 if the company doesn't make it big? If your answer is yes, your financial plan allows it, then go ahead, take risk with that $10,000. And, it's all about risk and return. So if you're ready to take that risk and you're willing to lose that, then go ahead, exercise that option. Then the third thing to remember is how long can you go without this money, even if you don't get it back. So even if you get it back, then remember, you're not getting it back for a couple of years because the company might not have an exit plan or a specified date for an IPO. So how long can you go without that money if you don't get it back? So those are the things that we want you to think about when you're exercising your options. Timing of the exercise. This is a very tricky thing in stock options, I would say. So if you're a very early stage employee, when you were just 5 or 6 employees in the company's stock was worth pennies, then exercise just makes sense because really you're not losing much. You're buying the stock for pennies. And what happens is that when you buy the stock for pennies, there's not much tax implications for you, and your capital gain tax rate clock starts right away. The moment you exercise your incentive stock options, your capital gain clock will start. So if you're a very early stage employee and you want to exercise your options, that's the best time because there's not much that you have to shell out of your pocket. Your capital gain clock starts the day you exercise the shares. If you miss the early exercise and the company has no timeline of going public, that's where you're treading in murky waters because you don't know what to do. The company might go public, might be acquired, might not be acquired. your stock options are not at very low price of pennies, you might have to shell out like $1 per share. And if you are planning to exercise a couple of thousand of stock options, then this is a tricky situation. And that's where the best in this case would be is to exercise the option when the company has decided they want to go public and they have a clear timeline in mind of when they want to go public. Between those timeframes, it's again a very hard decision, and you'll have to evaluate your situation based on the above 3 points that I just mentioned. Then after the company goes public, it's easy. You know the actual value of your company stock. So if you think that you were granted the stock at $1, the company has gone public, the price of the company stock is $10, you already know that you're making $9 right away off that stock. So yeah, then no brainer, go ahead and exercise it. Then again, leaving the company is another thing that's important in timing of exercise perspective, because usually you have 3 months after you leave the company to exercise your options. And after that, that option is taken away from you. So now if you're leaving the company, then of course, one thing is that the reason you're leaving the company is because maybe you didn't see future growth prospects for the company, or you were not happy with the company. So if you didn't see future growth prospects with the company, or you were not happy with how the company was going, do you still think you want to invest in the company's stock? If yes, then go ahead. You'll have 90. Usually, most of the options usually have a 90-day period for that, and you can exercise them within that 90 days. All right, now let's look at some of the key differences in incentive stock options and non-qualified stock options. Grant date, there is no difference. All you have to do at grant date is accept the grant. You don't have to do anything else. That's it. At exercise date is actually when the cash is required for both incentive stock options and non-qualified stock options. And if the company is public, then cashless exercise might be an option. And what cashless exercise means is that the company if you want to buy the shares, you can just ask the HR department to sell some right away from the ones that you are eligible to exercise, and they'll take the cash from that. So that's what cashless exercise means. If you don't want that, then there will be always cash required on exercise date. Now, taxation at exercise is what makes the ISOs and QSOs different. For ISOs, there is no taxation on exercise date. You buy the share, you give the money to buy the share, and that's it. You have to hold the shares for at least 2 years from grant and 1 year from exercise to sell the ISOs so you can get the long-term capital gain rate on all of that. So that's where there's no taxation at exercise. For non-qualified stock options, anytime you hear the word non-qualified in a financial term, that most of the time has to do with taxes. So when you're hearing the word non-qualified, remember, it has to do something with taxes. So what that means is that upon exercise, you will have ordinary income tax due on the bargain element, which is the difference between your exercise price and the market price of the share. So to give you an example, if I had a non-qualified stock option, I had the option of buying my company stock for $1, but on the day of exercise, the company stock is actually trading at $10 in the market. The $9 in case of non-qualified stock options is ordinary income to me on that date. And when I do my taxes for next year, it will be counted in my ordinary income tax. So that's where the major difference is between the two. Then FICA tax is due upon exercise on this one. The company will automatically withhold the FICA tax on this one. Then moving on to the next part of this on the differences is that Annabelle, can you? Yes, perfect. The holding period. So as I mentioned, the holding period for ISOs is usually 1 year from exercise and 2 years from grant. For non-qualified stock option, there is no holding period because you have paid your taxes due on the day of exercise. The company really doesn't care how long you hold the share for. So, and if you hold the share, if you decide to hold your non-qualified stock option, your capital gain clock will start ticking from the day you exercise it. So that's when, if you decide to hold the share, then you'll pay capital gain tax if the price of the company increases. Now, one thing that where ISOs and non-qualified stock options differ is, again, the alternative minimum tax. Now, this one is very tricky. I would really advise you that if you have ISOs and you're planning to exercise it, please work with a CPA or a person who knows enough about ISOs, because anytime you are exercising ISOs and you are in a certain tax bracket, you will probably have to deal with alternative minimum tax. But in non-qualified stock options, again, because you've already paid your taxes on the day of exercise, there is no alternative minimum tax in that case. Then taxation at sale is for ISOs, the difference between your selling price and your exercise price is all capital gain tax. So you don't pay any ordinary income tax on your incentive stock options. And that's where people prefer ISOs. Is like, okay, you're not paying ordinary income tax. You might be in 35% ordinary income tax bracket, but your capital gain tax bracket is still 20%. So that's where ISOs are a big advantage. For non-qualified stock options, you pay ordinary income tax on the day of exercise, and anything above that price on the day of exercise, if you decide to hold the share, then it will be capital gain tax, depending on your sale date. It could be long-term capital gain or short-term capital gain. If you hold it for more than 1 year from the day of exercise, then it's going to be long-term capital gain. If you decide to hold it for less than a year from your day of exercise, it's going to be short-term capital gain. So I know this is a lot, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time if you all have questions. Yes.
There's somebody on the call with us today that has a question about the NSO shares. They're on an iPhone, so we're not able to see your name. If you want to unmute and share your question. Or you can also let us know in the chat if those slides helped answer that question that you had too.
All right. Are there any other questions at this point?
I don't know if you guys were referring to saying iPhone 13. That was me, and I just had a comment. I don't have ISOs or non-qualified stock option. But I just recently discovered this, so it's an intriguing topic for me. I was mostly like really intrigued by the fact that you could have this gigantic tax bill because you could potentially make a lot all in 1 year if you are able to exercise your options. So that was my only thing that I was like, oh, that's good to know, so you don't screw yourself in the future without knowing what you're doing to yourself.
Yes, absolutely. If you have ISOs, that tax bill, like the alternative minimum tax bill and everything, you just have to pay a lot of attention to. If you're exercising your non-qualified stock options, everything, the bargain element is going to be ordinary income tax. So you'll have a gigantic tax bill in that 1 year. Yeah.
There's also a question about
So selling your
your
options means that
options.
when the company is not
Is that
public and
something that
you
can be
own the
done?
options, and are you able to sell your options? Okay, so this is a very recent change. It was not allowed for the past couple of years,
I
but a
believe
lot
so.
of recent grants, you are able to sell it. There is a company, like one of the companies is, I think, Equity Zen, if I'm not wrong, and they actually match the buyers and sellers of a private company, of a privately held company. So your company has to allow you to sell your, first of all, your company has to agree to it. If your company says that, yes, you can sell your options in a marketplace like Equity Zen, or I forget, there is another name that actually, yeah, I don't remember it now, but there's certain, yes, there are certain online marketplaces where you can trade privately held companies. And if your company allows you to do that, you can, but I don't know the details of how it works. There is, some companies give you that option to sell a certain percentage.
Yeah, it's a very limited buyer and seller market for options for employees who are looking to leave and looking to offload or get somebody on the private market essentially to buy those options. And we don't have enough of the technical background or experience with those particular marketplaces. It's very
Equity
limited
Zen,
and
yes.
not very
And I think you have,
Manisha, was the name of
if
the
I'm not
company
wrong, you have to
Equity
get,
Zen?
like, your company will tell you
Okay.
which marketplace your company share are traded on. And that's where, yeah, so if you're planning, if your company has given you the option, they should actually give you all the details of where you would be able to sell the company's options and what price and everything.
Yes. And Mary, yes, the company, if they prevent you from selling your options, you can't go anywhere with them. Yeah. And you were also wondering about, like, your husband. Maybe you can speak to this, Manish, but it was the comment, the question she put on the meetup group. Her husband has some options, and they must be non-qualified options because he said there would be a big tax bill
Yes.
if he exercised the options before
Yeah,
there
and
was the opportunity.
yeah, as I was saying,
sell
that
it.
you're treading in murky
And,
water right there,
yeah, do you
because
wanna
you
speak
don't
to that?
know. There is no exit plan right now, but you have to shell out money of your pocket to exercise those options. So I would say that look at your overall financial picture, and if your financial plan allows you to take risk with a certain amount of money, go ahead and take that risk if you're willing to take that risk. Because, and also remember that you don't have to, you might have a lot of shares vested them in chunks. Once you have your vested shares, you're free to exercise them anytime within the 10-year exercise time frame. Most of the time, the companies have a 10-year exercise time frame, and you can do that in chunks. So you don't have to exercise them all at the same time. Look at your financial picture. If you are ready to invest some money in a very risky investment and your financial plan allows it, go ahead and do it. If your husband, I think you said, was one of the early stage employees, and you are given the option of exercising at a very low price, and I think making an 83B election is one of the options where you pay some taxes right away. That might be worth looking into. But I would say that look at your grant documents and consult your CPA for if there is an 83B election on the early exercise option, and work with that.
Gwen, do you want to mention that one?
Yes. So the same member that is on the iPhone and asked about their NSOs and their tax impact of vesting and then selling has a follow-up question. So I'll just read it. I have NQSOs, and if I believe that the company's stock price is going to go up significantly in, say, 3 years, tax-wise, am I better off exercising my options at the 3-year mark versus now?
So my follow-up question to that is the company already public?
If you had this question, okay, it's private.
It is private. Okay. So remember, if for a private company, you're taking the risk because you don't know how the market is going to value your company. So, for example, I think last year, Rivian Electric, I think they're in the business of making electric trucks, pickup trucks or something. They went public. The stock price opened at a couple of $100 or maybe more than $100. But given the recent market volatility, it has gone down pretty significantly to like, I think $30 or $40. So you cannot predict what your company's stock is going to do. So remember, if you're exercising your non-qualified stock options, first of all, you have to come out of money from your pocket. Second, you will be subject to ordinary income tax at the time of exercise. So you have come out of money from your pocket. You have already paid the taxes on that money, on that exercise, the difference between the exercise price and whatever the hypothetical value of your company stock is. Now, what if when the company goes public, you're not able to recover those costs and the share doesn't list at that high price? So you are taking the risk. So again, but you feel very strongly about your company, understand your risks, and if you are ready to take that risk, you have full understanding of the risk and you want to go ahead with that decision, go ahead, because it's always, as we say in our company, there is no right or wrong decision. It's always a risk-return trade-off. So yeah, that's what it is going to come at.
I can speak to my experience. I was in a startup, and I was one of the early employees, and everybody I knew was going over this question. Should I buy the shares now? Should I wait until we're close to the IPO? Are we ever going to IPO? What's going to happen? And there's not a clear answer. So I waited until there was an IPO, because just because you think your company is going to IPO doesn't mean that it actually will. And the IPO price is set by the banks, and they set it for a particular reason that has to do with the profit they're going to make. It doesn't have anything to do with what you're going to do. And there was a blackout period, I think of 6 months after we IPO'd. So none of the employees were allowed to sell their shares. And by the time we sold our shares, the price from IPO had gone up and then back down. So it was not as high as it was at IPO, because that's when all the excitement was. So it really is a personal decision of how much you think the company is going to succeed, how much money you want to put into it. It is a risk decision, how much you want to risk. And lots of people have gone through it, and there's not going to be a clear answer to exactly what you should do and what's the right answer. But it does help a lot to understand what the options are and what the tax implications are, because then when they tell you something, if you're at IPO time, you can calculate what that means for you. That it helps a lot to just kind of know it cold if you're in that situation. So that's just my 2 cents on that. And then I found this really great article from Morgan Stanley to explain non-qualified options, and I'm just going to post that. It seemed to be a nice overview of it, because just understanding what's going on is kind of hard.
Great, thanks, Lori.
Annabelle and Manisha, do y'all have more slides to take us through?
Nope, this is our sort of our final one, just to, again, as we've said many times, but here's our bumper sticker summary. You can't control all the, variety of factors and the circumstances around what happens to the value of your company stock, but you can control how you integrate those options and units and compensation packages that you're offered into your overall financial plan and your short and medium and long-term goals, and also your values. That's something that's very important to us as planners. Is what is your money doing for you that's impactful for you? How is it translated to value, for your mental well-being, your financial well-being, your professional well-being, that of your family? So that all plays into this picture, which makes it not very black and white. And as I said, we could spend hours and hours on lots of other details getting into the weeds, and you can talk to tax attorneys and CPAs about stuff that they look at deeply or in depth when it comes to these types of topics. But just wanted to close out with that final takeaway for everyone. So, and I think it looks like Manisha may have been had some problems with her connections there. But any other questions we can answer before we let everyone get back to this beautiful evening? And Gwen and Lori, if you have anything you want to add as well.
Yeah, thank y'all so much it was a lot of information to take us through, and it was, I think, a really good high-level overview with some good frameworks for these decisions that folks have to make. Also considerations of who to include in the conversation. So now, if y'all have questions, please feel free to unmute. I did want to just punt one question that came up at the beginning that we weren't able to get to until now. But Deidre was asking, so are equity comp packages negotiated at the time of hire? Is that she feels like she had just never been in the know about this, and when does that conversation come up?
Yeah, that's a great question. By and large, 90% of the time, they are negotiated at the time of hire. And then through the performance and appraisal cycle, you often have the chance to modify or request additional, more RSUs. Obviously, it's different with a public company versus a private company that hasn't gone public yet. So there tends to be, I think, a little bit more for a publicly traded company. There's, they have more restrictions about how much they, can give you an additional compensation, and there's various, regulations, that type of thing. But yes, you can always negotiate this during your hiring discussion, and lots of times companies like to just kind of give you the default and present you with this as, here's what you get, or they don't tell you about it and it's in the fine print. Some of them are a lot more confusing than others. Like we work with a number of clients with Amazon, and they have a pretty complicated initial hiring package that they give you. And most people just kind of throw up their hands and they're like, great, I want the job. I'll figure it out later. Or I'll ask friends. And then it does become, a little bit overwhelming when you're trying to get into the weeds, so to speak. But yes, you can also, we do also, when as your RSUs vest, and for example, you clear out that initial lot, many companies, I know Facebook is one, when you have discussions with your manager or supervisor at your annual review time, you can ask for additional RSUs to say, like, I've gone off the cliff. They've all vested. I want more, and you can request more.
I'll jump in here now because I am in this situation. I just was offered a new position, jumping from one tech company to another. And just to give you, I think, first of all, I'm going to say, as us ladies, darn it, come to the table and ask for more, because I can tell you that I turned down the first offer and they came back with a second offer, and I turned down the second offer, and they nearly doubled my RSU amount on the third offer. And I said yes to that one. Yes. And this is my
That's
question.
freaking
So
awesome.
this particular
That's amazing.
company does not do a 1-year cliff, which I am doing a happy dance about. But I am wondering, is it up to the company to determine it? Typical 4-year vesting cycle, right, with most tech companies these days. But is there a law that governs how many shares are released? Because I was just wondering what that initial, if there is no 1-year cliff, am I just going to get it vests on a quarterly basis, so every 3 months. So I would just do the math to divide the number of shares that I'm going to get, whatever that number is, because I got a dollar amount, so I'd have to wait till the date. So I was just wondering how that allocation comes up, right? Because in the company I'm in, I got like 25% after the 1-year cliff, and then I got the remaining 75% over the next, 3 years on a quarterly basis. So is that type of allocation a legal requirement, or is it up to the individual tech companies to determine what their vesting and number of shares releasing is going to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's there isn't really, I should say, there are SEC and regulatory rules around how companies structure that helps to preserve the rights of the employees, but also provides a lot of wiggle room for the companies. So from a macro perspective, there are legal and constraints around that, but companies do have significant discretion to their own proprietary vesting schedules, even down to what week in April once a year or what week in November once a year that those shares vest. And then you also have for many certain types of employees, and you may be in this category, you have certain trading windows where your stock might, your shares may have vested, but you can't actually sell those except when the company's official trading windows are open for certain types of executives. And that's essentially to account for insider trading protections. But yeah, it's proprietary depending on the company, and they have a lot of discretion to set the vesting schedule. Some of them are annually, some of them are semi-annually, and some of them are quarterly. Manisha, do you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, I'm on a
No, I think you said it
I'm
all,
on a
Annabelle.
quarterly
So
basis, and
perfect.
there is a running joke in our company that,
Yeah, it should be in
look,
that
our stock is going
fine
to go
print.
up just as we get into the blackout, like to the moon. Yay, we can't do squat. Oh, look, we just sold, and then it went up, and so definitely. And then I'm finding for me personally that I'm proactively given refresher, which is, the more stock options in that annual review. So I have not actually asked for more. I probably could ask for more during the appraisal time period and say, no, you gave me, X amount, but I'd like more than that. But honestly, I've just been, after my Dell days where the stock was in the toilet and totally useless, I was just happy that I actually had some stock that was worth something.
Yeah, I think refresher is a very common thing in tech companies, and I think you should, if during the annual review process, definitely ask for refreshers and most of the times what I've realized and seen is that the companies in tech have like you can negotiate on the RSUs and stuff more heavily than you can on the base compensation. So if
Yeah,
your
do you
base
guys see a
compensation
correlation
is
between a
lower, then
company and
definitely go
what
ahead and
level of
negotiate
series
on the
funding they're
RSUs.
on versus how much? Because I don't know much about this, but the company I'm currently with and I'm about to leave is like they've reached this point where they're not giving out as much RSUs, and I think it's because I don't know if they've exhausted some level of whatever the FCC or the series funding that they're on. But is there any like rule of thumb where you can say, hey, if you're only on round C of funding versus somebody who's further along, that there's more risk? Like, is there a correlation between the amount of risk with a company that's at different rounds of funding?
I think it has to do do with the venture capitalists and the investors and how much diluted they want the company to go, because anytime you're giving RSUs to the employees, you're diluting their share. So they will all come up with VCs and the investors and ISO grants and all of that. So I don't think it's as much a SEC regulation until the company is public, as much it's from the VCs and the board of directors and everybody.
I see there's one more question here regarding kind of around the same topic on the blackout periods from Emily. And Emily asked about whether the blackout rules still apply to employees after leaving the company. And the answer is no. The blackout rules are in place to prevent insider trading of internal information and benefiting from sharing of facts that would not normally be available to the public. So once the employee has departed the company,
and that is part of my
and
strategy,
is no
because
longer
we
employed,
just had a
the
vesting
blackout
period, so I
period
just
doesn't
got
apply
a couple
anymore.
of different grants of RSUs, right? Different lots that have vested, and I was like, oh, I'm planning to leave, and I'm just going to hang on to these till we go into the blackout when we go up, and then I will dump them.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Do we have any other lingering questions?
No, but I thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Looks like everyone's, yeah, thank you. Everyone's ready to get to some rosé in this afternoon. So
Yes.
Awesome. Well, Annabelle and Manisha, thank you both so much for another informative discussion. This was super helpful, and we've already gotten a lot of great feedback from everybody in the chat box. Thanks everybody for joining us. I hope that y'all have some plans to enjoy the nice weather in Austin or wherever you may be this weekend. Keep an eye out for the follow-up message to go out. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to have the link to the recording here, as well as contact info for Annabelle and Manisha. If y'all have any general high-level questions about ISOs that they may be able to answer in an email, or if you'd like to connect with them on LinkedIn, that would be that'll all be in the follow-up message. And just a quick plug for our next meeting. We don't have the information up yet on the meetup group, but it is scheduled for April 23rd. That's a Saturday, 2:30 to 4:30 p.m. We're actually going to be led by Colette Fitzgerald, who was on the call earlier, but I think she has jumped off already. And it's going to be about living and retiring abroad. So y'all may have seen that there was a special announcement that we now have an AWIC subgroup led by Colette, where all discussions at the intersection of finance, investing, retirement, and travel and living abroad can happen both in person and on the Facebook group. So keep an eye out for information on the meeting for Live and Retire Abroad group that will be led by Colette in April. Other than that, if y'all have any questions, reach out to myself and Lori and Sarah, and we'd love to get you connected with everybody else in AWIG and yeah, folks in the community that can help out with any questions that y'all have. Thanks for joining, everybody.
thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, ladies.
Yeah,
that was awesome.
Yeah, great
Thanks.
job. Great job. There were lots of questions, so it's a good presentation.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I appreciate that that you're stepping in with your personal experiences, Lori. That's
Mm-hmm.
helpful to have that anecdotal as
Yeah.
well. As you can see, it's very individual for every situation.
Yeah.
And as to Manisha's excellent point, you don't know, everyone's individual situation is different and their tax situation is different. So it's hard to go too deep into, actual, answers that are customized and very personal. But I'm glad we got the opportunity to do so. And the other thing too is like, I know we kept referring to tech companies, but this is obviously relevant to manufacturing and retail and pharmaceutical. It's a big one now. Energy, all of these